The terminal buzzed with activity as travelers hustled to their gates, each step a beat in the orchestra of travel chaos. Barron Trump stood near the gate, his attention focused on his phone. His flight to New York had been delayed by 30 minutes, and the restlessness around him was palpable. The wail of a crying toddler, the harsh words of a businessman arguing with a gate agent, and the constant shuffle of people created a cacophony of noise, but Barron remained calm, scrolling through his messages as he waited for the next update on his flight. A gate agent, an older man with sharp features and a seemingly impatient air, approached the area. His gaze flickered across the passengers and landed on Barron. Something about the teenager's presence in the priority boarding section seemed to bother him. The agent's voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, young man. Are you sure you're in the right boarding group?" Barron looked up, startled but calm. "Yes, I am. I have a first-class ticket," he replied, his voice steady but polite. The agent scrutinized him for a moment, his gaze flickering over Barron's phone. "Can I see your ticket?" Barron hesitated. It wasn't the first time he'd been singled out, but there was something about this man's tone, more forceful than necessary, that made him uneasy. He handed over his boarding pass, the name Barron Trump clearly displayed. The agent read it aloud, pausing as if the name meant something more than just a boarding pass. Instead of backing off, the agent's demeanor seemed to harden. "Wait here," he said, and without another word, he walked away. As Barron stood there, a few curious glances were cast his way. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd, and Barron could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. He tried to maintain his composure, but the situation felt increasingly uncomfortable. Minutes later, the agent returned, flanked by a supervisor. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket," the agent said firmly. "You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." Barron frowned. "What issue?" "I booked this ticket weeks ago." The supervisor stepped in. "We're handling it, sir." Barron felt his frustration build. "I've flown through this airport dozens of times without an issue." The supervisor's face was neutral, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Please step away from the gate." As Barron reluctantly moved aside, passengers around him started to take notice. Some pulled out their phones and began recording the interaction, their murmurs growing louder. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, and the weight of their stares was unbearable. After several minutes, the supervisor returned. "We're unable to verify your identity through the system," he said. "Do you have another form of identification?" Barron's patience was wearing thin. "My passport's in my carry-on bag. You didn't even check it." The supervisor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the straightforward response. But instead of backing off, he doubled down. "Sir, this isn't just about identification. There are procedures we need to follow." "Procedures?" Barron asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "What procedures?" "I've flown here 100 times with no issues." The gate agent interjected. "We've had some irregularities lately. You're not being singled out," he said, but the look in his eyes told a different story. At that moment, a woman with a toddler approached. She spoke up, her voice clear and firm. "What's the problem?" "He's just a kid with a ticket. Let him board." The supervisor ignored her, focusing instead on Barron. "Please wait here while we conduct a further review. If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate the matter." Barron's chest tightened. He was about to respond when a pair of airport security officers appeared beside him. Their presence made the crowd grow even more curious. Phones came out, and the tension in the air was almost suffocating. "Sir, please come with us," one officer said in a measured tone. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Barron didn't argue. He grabbed his carry-on bag and followed the officers into a small room nearby, the whispers following him like a storm cloud. Inside, the officers began flipping through his passport, their questions mechanical and cold. "This is ridiculous," Barron muttered under his breath. One officer glanced up but didn't respond. Instead, they continued to ask him questions about his identity, the flight, and his personal details. Barron sat there, growing increasingly frustrated. He knew this wasn't about a ticket or an ID, it was something deeper, something that felt personal. But before he could dwell on it any further, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. In the backseat of a black SUV, Melania Trump was scrolling through her phone, preparing for a quick trip to New York. Her mind was focused on her plans until her phone buzzed with a flurry of texts and social media alerts. One caught her attention. Something was happening at the airport involving her son. People were posting videos of Barron surrounded by security officers. Melania's face hardened. She immediately instructed her driver to speed up. Her thoughts raced, but her posture remained poised as she read more of the posts. Meanwhile, Barron was sitting in the small room, stewing in silence. His phone was gone, his bag searched, and still no clear answer. How had it all escalated this quickly? Was it his last name? Was that the reason they were treating him this way? He had no answers, only a growing sense of frustration. Then the door opened. The supervisor from earlier stepped in, avoiding Barron's eyes. "We're still working on clearing up the situation," he said, sounding defensive. "It shouldn't be much longer." "How much longer?" Barron asked, his voice sharp. "I've already been waiting here forever." The supervisor didn't answer. Instead, he mumbled something about procedures before leaving again. Outside the terminal, Melania's SUV pulled up to the curb. She stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor as she made her way toward the gate. She didn't need to announce her presence. Her mere approach caused people to step aside. She could feel the whispers and stares, but her focus was unshakable. She had one goal: find her son. When she spotted the door where Barron was being held, her pace quickened. She entered the room just as the officers returned. "What is going on here?" Melania's voice was calm but full of authority. The officers froze. "Mrs. Trump," one officer began, fumbling for words, "this is just a standard protocol." "Protocol?" Melania cut him off. "You're holding my son in a small room with no explanation. What kind of protocol is this?" The supervisor appeared behind her, pale. "It's a misunderstanding. We were just trying to verify his ticket." "A misunderstanding?" Melania's voice grew colder. "Do you treat all passengers this way, or just the ones you decide don't belong in first class today?" The room went silent as the officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Melania wasn't backing down. She turned to Barron, her expression softening. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Barron nodded, his frustration still palpable. "I'm fine. Just wasting my time." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "We'll make sure this is handled." The supervisor looked panicked as he realized the gravity of the situation. Melania demanded to speak to someone in charge, and within minutes, a higher-ranking airport official arrived. As the supervisor led the way back to the gate, Melania and Barron followed closely behind. The passengers who had witnessed the incident were still lingering, their curiosity piqued by the sudden reappearance of Barron and his mother. At the gate, the supervisor cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. His voice wavered as he apologized for the incident. "A misunderstanding involving one of our passengers, Mr. Barron Trump, led to actions that were unnecessary and inappropriate. We deeply regret the inconvenience and discomfort caused." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some passengers exchanged surprised looks, others nodded in agreement. Melania stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "Thank you for your words. But words are not enough." She turned to the crowd, her gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about my son. It's about treating every individual with respect, no matter their name or background. My son may carry a name that draws attention, but he is also a person. Let this be a reminder to all of us to treat everyone with the dignity they deserve." The crowd responded with applause, and even the supervisor seemed moved by her words. As the situation settled, Melania and Barron made their way to the lounge to wait for their flight. Though the incident had been resolved, the message it left behind would resonate far beyond the walls of the terminal.